I am thrilled to make this recipe for several reasons. The first being that a beautifully spiced pear filling can stand up to an apple filling any day of the week, in my opinion. Secondly, the finished product is similar to an apple turnover, but instead it has the unique sweetness and flavor that comes from really ripe pears. And it's spiced with the warmth that comes from cardamom and ginger. The pastry itself on the outside of the hand pie is made with a really wonderful pie dough that is crisp and tender all at the same time. And as I mentioned, the filling is going to be one of the best tasting pear flavors you've ever had. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is combine our dry ingredients together in a food processor for our pie dough. The pie dough has to rest in the fridge for 1 hour, which is perfect because that gives us time to make the pear filling on the stovetop and have it cool and ready to fill our hand pies with. So, in your food processor, you're going to combine first 2 cups of all-purpose flour with 3 tablespoons of granulated sugar and a teaspoon of kosher salt. And we're just gonna give this a quick blitz to incorporate all the ingredients together. Okay, now it's time to add our fats. So right here I have 10 tablespoons of unsalted butter that I've cubed into about 1-inch cubes, and it's still really cold. This is important to make sure that the finished product is really flaky and buttery. Okay, so we'll just add these right into the food processor. And then here I have a 1/4 cup of vegetable shortening that I've also kept in the fridge just to make it nice and cold. I've broken it up into pieces and we're gonna drop these pieces in. The reason we do a combination of butter and vegetable shortening is that the two work together to make a pastry dough that is both buttery, crumbly, and flaky, which is kind of what makes the best pie dough the best pie dough. You need both. So drop these in, and I'm gonna pulse my food processor just 10 times. This ensures that each of these pieces is broken up into roughly the size of like a small pebble. You want little pebbly pieces because when we roll out the dough, those pieces will be stretched out and elongated and encourage the pie dough to flake and puff in the heat of the oven. Okay, so these are in. I'm gonna put on my lid and I'm gonna pulse it 10 times. If you find that any of your pieces are bigger than a small pebble, just pulse it for a couple more rounds. You're looking for butter pieces that are about this size. It's still big enough to notice, but small enough to not really make a huge lump in your pie dough. Okay, so once we're there, we're now going to add our ice water. I'm gonna add my 6 tablespoons of ice water to the food processor and just pulse it a couple times and check on it. If it's developing into nice clumps, then we're in a good spot. If it's still really dry and the dough isn't really coming together, you may need to add 1 or 2 more tablespoons of ice water. This is largely gonna depend on your flour and how well your food processor is running. You can feel in, and if when you press it together, it sticks together into a nice clump, you know that your dough is ready to go. Mine is gonna take just a little bit more water, probably 1 additional tablespoon. It should look something like this. You can see that as I'm pressing it together, it's forming larger clumps, and that's how you know that your pie dough is done. So we're gonna transfer this onto our work surface and just press this into about a 1-inch thick disc. It looks super crumbly right now, but it will come together really well into a disc of dough. As it sits in the fridge, the water will fully hydrate into the flour, making it a nice, smooth, and pliable dough that we're gonna work with in about an hour. You don't want to knead the dough. You're simply pressing it together until it forms a nice, solid disc. I'm now going to take my disc of dough and wrap it in plastic wrap and pop it in the fridge for an hour. Now to make the best part of these hand pies, the pear filling. The first thing you'll start with is 1.5 pounds of cubed pears. The recipe calls for Bosc pears, however, use the ripest pears that you can find. At my market this week, it was Anjou. They're wonderfully soft and smell really fragrant, which is a wonderful way to tell if your pear is ripe. It should smell like a pear. So I've cut them into about 1-inch cubes. Doesn't have to be perfect. And I also didn't even bother peeling them because it's kind of unnecessary. The peel will sort of break down, and as you eat the hand pie, you won't even notice. I've added my cubed pears to a medium-sized saucepan, and now time to add the rest of the ingredients. So we're gonna start with 1 tablespoon of water. This just helps the cooking process in the beginning so that none of the sugar burns on the bottom of the pan. The pears will release a lot of juice eventually, but you need to give them just a little bit of moisture to help. The next thing we're gonna add is 1.5 tablespoons of honey. Honey adds a different kind of sweetness that you really can't get from any other ingredient. And I think in something like this, it's really special. So 1.5 tablespoons of honey, 1/4 cup of light brown sugar, a pinch of salt, and then the juice of half a lemon. Lemon in something like this does 2 things. It brightens the flavor of the pear and really makes it more present on your palate. And it also helps with the moisture problem in the very beginning by making sure that everything's moist and well coated so that nothing burns in the beginning of the cooking process. Now for the best part, the spices. Here are the 4 spices we're using to flavor these pears. So right here we have 1/2 teaspoon of ground ginger, 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and 1/2 teaspoon of ground cardamom. And this is star anise, which we will pull out after the pears are finished cooking and before we start filling the hand pies. Now, star anise can be somewhat of a controversial spice because it does, I will admit, it does have a bit of a licorice flavor. And licorice is not the most popular of sweet flavors. However, I have served this pear filling to well over 100 people, and never once have I had someone complain that it tastes like licorice. The star anise here works with the ginger and the cinnamon and the cardamom, adding a unique edge that you can't quite name, but it's truly exceptional and it makes it taste like something different than your average apple or pear filling. So don't skip on the star anise, give it a shot, and I promise you'll really enjoy it. Okay, so I'm adding these spices in, and then I'm going to stir just to coat everything really well in everything. Now that my pears are coated, I'm going to transfer this to medium heat and cook it until the pears are broken down and really soft. It'll take about 25 to 30 minutes, and you don't need to stand over the pot, but just stir it every couple of minutes to make sure that nothing is sticking to the bottom. It's been 27 minutes for me, and you'll notice that the pears are done when you pull a spatula through, and a clear path stays in the bottom of the pot and it slowly fills in with the thickened syrup from the pears. If it fills in too quickly, that means that the syrup isn't thick enough yet, and so when you fill the pies, it'll be messy. So you want to cook them until the pears are really soft and that trail is left behind by the spatula. All right, now that my pear filling is done cooking, I'm going to set it aside to cool because we're gonna be working with our hands and you don't want it to be hot. Also, you don't wanna add the hot pear filling to the pie dough because it will cause the butter in the pie dough to melt before it has the opportunity to bake. But the first thing you wanna do is just kind of go through the pear filling with a fork and remove the star anise. Sometimes a branch or 2 of the star anise will break off, so just look for them. These are not good to eat. They're certainly not edible. So go through with a fork and just pull out any bits of star anise that you find. They're really easy to find. They're big, they're dark, they're brown. And set this aside to cool. You can even pop it in the fridge for 25 to 30 minutes if you want. My pear filling is almost cool and my pie dough has been in the fridge for over an hour. So now it's time to roll this out and cut it into the circles that are gonna make the hand pies. So start by flouring your surface pretty generously. I like to press down with the palm of my hand before I roll out, just to encourage it to roll out evenly and without a ton of cracks on the side. I find that if I press down with my palm and I notice it cracking around the edges, I can use my thumbs to press down on those cracks and form them back together. And that prevents those cracks from being a problem as I roll it out. So I'm gonna lift it up and reflour underneath just so it doesn't stick. And I'm rolling this circle out into 1/8 of an inch thick circle. And I'm using this 3.5 inch round cutter to cut out about 24 circles. So we'll have 24 hand pies. You wanna have 2 baking sheets lined with parchment paper ready to go. And you wanna have your oven preheated to 375 because once we roll these out, it's a pretty quick process of filling, closing, crimping, brushing, and baking. Now that I have all of my circles of dough punched out, I want to have the rest of my ingredients ready to go. So I have my pear filling right here. It's chilled. It's perfect to make the pies. I have some egg wash right here, which For me, it was just an egg and a little bit of whole milk whisked together. You can do egg and a little bit of water if you don't have milk on hand. A pastry brush, you can use your finger if you need to, and some raw sugar, which we're gonna use to sprinkle the hand pies before we bake. You're gonna take a circle of dough and place about 1 tablespoon of the pear filling inside the circle. Line the edge of the circle with some egg wash, fold it in half to close it, and use a fork to crimp the edges. Then you're gonna place that on your baking sheet and repeat with the remaining circles and filling. When you fold the hand pie over, simply press down on the edges. Some of the pear might come out, that's okay. And then flour your fork, just so that it doesn't stick to the pastry dough, and simply crimp by pressing the fork down along the edge. All right, I have 1 tray of my hand pies right here, and I'm going to brush them now with the remaining egg wash and sprinkle them with some raw sugar. The raw sugar adds a little bit of sweetness to the buttery, salty pie dough, but it mainly adds crunchiness to the outside, which is a really nice contrast in texture to the soft center and the crumbly outside pastry. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to use a paring knife and just poke 2 or 3 slits in the top of each hand pie. This allows any steam that's created inside of the hand pie to come out of those slits rather than forcing the sides to break open, ruining your hand pie. So this step, really important. My hand pies are brushed, they're sprinkled, they're ready to go. I have my oven preheated to 375 degrees, and these are gonna bake for about 20 to 25 minutes. However, it's really important before you put these in the oven, you need to pop them in the freezer for about 10 minutes. Since you've been working with the dough, pressing and crimping and folding, that encourages the butter and the shortening in the dough to warm up a little bit. And if it goes into the oven now, it'll bake and it'll be okay, but the pastry won't be as crisp as it could be. So by popping it in the freezer, you ensure that the butter and the shortening firm back up right before going into the oven, giving us that crispy, airy, layered pastry dough that we're looking for. So in the freezer for 10 minutes and then in the oven for 20 to 25, just until the pastry is beautifully browned. My hand pies are done cooling and they look wonderful. You can see the browning around the edges. You can feel that the sugar crystals on the surface of the pastry are nice and firm and crisp. And when you break into it, it gives way. You can hear the pastry, how it kind of crumbles underneath. And you can see from the edges of the pastry are flaky and look like pie dough should look. And the filling is still soft and moist, but it's not oozing out of the hand pie. Let's give it a shot. The spices in these pears are unbelievable. They go so well together. I mean, cinnamon is a really common ingredient in apple or pear pies, hand pies, turnovers, but it's the cardamom and the ginger and the star anise that set these apart and make them taste extra special and decadent. And the pastry dough is flaky. It breaks as you bite into it really easily and kind of cracks, but then it's really tender and soft in the mouth. And it's buttery, it's a little salty from the tablespoon of kosher salt that goes into the dough, which is a wonderful salty sweet contrast to both the raw sugar on the outside of the hand pie and the sweetness of the honey and the brown sugar in the pear filling. Give this recipe a try and make this treat for either yourself or anyone that you care for. I promise they'll be appreciative. If you've enjoyed the video that you've seen today, subscribe to the Southern Living YouTube channel, where you're sure to find other food videos just like this one that we know you'll enjoy. Thanks so much. See you next time. Bye.